This is The Balanced Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma, managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura Carlin.
And I'm Christy Derrico. At The Balanced Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balanced stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, executives, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time?
Our guest is Nicola Krause, co-author of the famous Nanny Diaries. Now, it's hard to believe it was published almost 25 years ago in 2002, and that book offered a fictionalized look at households and help on the Tony Upper East Side of Manhattan. Except maybe not totally fictional, as both Nicola and her co-writer, Emma McLaughlin, were nannies in that area during their college years. The Nanny Diaries was made into a film with Scarlett Johansson and Alicia Keys. Nicola and Emma went on to pen 9 more novels together before embarking on their solo professional and personal journeys. And we're going to get into Nicola's thoughts on this amicable, conscious uncoupling a la Gwyneth Paltrow. A writer, columnist, Nicola addresses issues of womanhood, motherhood, relationships, and life in general. And in May 2025, her first solo novel, The Best We Could Hope For, will be released. Welcome to The Balanced Dilemma, Nicola.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Welcome. So you had early success, not in a small way, but in a big way with the Nanny Diaries, which came out in your 20s. Tell us about that. How did that form your career going forward?
I had started as an actress. That was the thing that I thought I wanted to do. And I was very single-mindedly focused on that goal, including graduating from college a year early, because let's get that humiliation going. And I kept running into Emma on the street. We had both been nannies, but we had sort of drifted apart, as you do in your early 20s, because you're both working 60-hour weeks. And then I invited her to a play that I wrote, and she sent me an email the next day and said, "Hey, do you want to write a book about nannying?" And at that point, I decided I was done with acting. I was looking into doing my pre-med prereqs, and I was teaching yoga, and I was writing. And I thought, one of these is the path out. And so I said, well, I think it's a terrible idea. It was a miserable job. No one would want to read about it, but sure. So we started working on it, and it very quickly took on a life of its own. Within a few months, we had an agent. It was published 2 years after that.
How did that happen, and how did you know it was, so quickly know that this was something?
The thing. It's sort of probably the way, like when you met your life partner, you're like, oh, hi. We sat down together on the very first writing session, and we just started brainstorming about the job interview. And we realized that not only did our memories match each other, but that the jobs that we'd had a certain pattern to them. And so we started to have an insight that this wasn't a subjective experience, that there was something here worth satirizing because it was clearly systemic. And so we divvied it up. I was going to do the tour around the apartment. She would do meeting the child. I would do the kitchen. And she sent me her sections during the week, and I was the first person to put it all together. And immediately you could not tell who wrote what. And that document has never been edited. What I put together that first morning is exactly what's still sitting on bookshelves. And so I immediately knew, oh, this is freakish. 2 people should not be able to put their voices together like this and have it be seamless. So that was a pretty clear sort of tap on the shoulder.
But you really have 2 things here. You have a great partnership, but you also had a great idea. And I'm just listening to you talking about the interview. That must have been a really unique situation that both of you said, I think this is important.
Yes. I think what was happening at that moment in New York City was that money was sort of falling from the sky. And there were all these articles in New York Magazine and the Sunday Style section about how hard it was for the newly rich to find good help. And Emma kept saying, you were terrible to work for. And so there was a sense of urgency, but we thought we would put this out the way our friends were doing theater on the weekends or making sculpture in their bathroom. 15 people would love it, and we'd move on with our lives. We had no idea this was actually the beginning of a new career for both of us.
And you got a lot of pushback of that might be happening in some homes, but that's not us. Tell us about that, what you kept hearing.
Well, it was funny. Our day-to-day experience of it was actually the opposite of that. Even when we were in Amsterdam, people kept coming up to us, and they have socialized childcare saying, Mrs. X is my daughter-in-law, or Mrs. X is my mother-in-law. It was universal. Even in the South China Seas, people said that to us. So we ended up feeling really validated in what we brought attention to. I remember doing a reading in San Francisco, and this Black woman stood up with a white child asleep around her like a dinghy and said, in tears, I love my job so much. I have never had anything to point to explain why it's important. Thank you. So maybe some people's noses were out of joint, but we wrote it for that woman.
Right. It wasn't just satire. It was actually a
It was a
testament
love
to something
letter.
that's really important.
Yes. And I think people miss that women who go into childcare, while they deserve a living wage and a tremendous amount of respect, also really enjoy it. We really love what we do.
So did you have any lessons from the Nanny Diaries, from writing it, from working in that, about what you should look for in looking for childcare, what you would and wouldn't ask or hire? Or tell us, especially for those who may be looking to hire help.
I actually sidestepped the entire issue because I was such a coward, and my daughter went to daycare. She started at 3 months old because I knew that if I had someone working in my house, I'd be like, you know what, you sit down, I've got this. Emma had nannies all the way through for her 2 boys, and I was in awe of her ability to navigate the relationship. She was really clear about what she wanted, which was basically a younger version of herself. So she deliberately hired girls out of art school who would take her kids to museums, who would joke with them and engage with them as friends. And she was able to get the boys, up to the point that they were starting school full time, having had an amazing cadre of women behind them who basically were her substitute, right? They did everything the way she would want. She came home one day and there was the diary that was, the nap schedule.
Oh, really?
And it said, 120 down for a nap, 140 awake, shoot me in the face. And Emma's like, I love you. You are my person.
I'm always the one to throw in the personal stories here. So one of my children was very difficult to get to sleep. And so the poor nanny, would say, don't go anywhere near the second floor when they're sleeping. And I had someone helping me, a young college student, and he heard my daughter say, Scott, help me, come get me. I've hurt my head. So he went in and took her out. And the nanny, who was very beautiful young woman, said, Scott, you are obviously an idiot. Yeah. She was lying. There's no way she hurt her head. That pretty much says it all.
Yes. That's the woman you want in your corner. You're like, thank you.
I always sided with the nanny.
Yeah, like you have my kid down.
That's right.
So any red flags someone hiring should be aware of?
I think you want to find someone ideally who is, well, first of all, reliable, right? You have somewhere you need to be. So they need to be on time or preferably early. So that's the first thing. And someone who is empathetic to your child, because it's hard to be small. The world is set up for big people. And so you want someone who has the ability to look at the situation from their perspective and be that kind, consistent presence. That's really the most important thing. What I often say to friends of mine who are much younger, who are just starting their families, is also that I think women frequently think that what they want to do is really staff up or be present at the beginning when their kids are small, because it seems like the child is so dependent and that's the most important time to be with them. But actually anyone can really do that part. And really you want to be earning that capital in your work life.
That's right.
So that in those later years when it can only be you at the school play or on the sidelines, you can duck out.
The one they'll remember and won't throw in your face at the wedding day. You were never there.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to this early success. Were there pitfalls to being so successful so quickly and so early?
Yeah. Oh, yes. It was wildly disorienting. We were so young, and our very first television appearance was the Today Show in the 7 o'clock hour with Katie Couric. Nothing in life can prepare you for that. And it's not like we'd come off a film set. We really had no idea to expect the response that we were going to get. And while the audience was incredibly loving and supportive, there definitely was a narrative in the media that we had told tales out of school, that this was a real family, which it absolutely was not. There was even an article in the New York Times where someone thought that they had found out who Mrs. X was, which is ridiculous because, again, she doesn't exist. And that felt awful. We were scared a lot of the time. We were worried that we would get, canceled before canceling existed. And we just wanted to do right by the people that we cared about, the children that we had loved, the families that we had adored working for, the women who we respected enormously. And so the fear all the time that we were going to put a foot wrong or that something would happen to break the two of us up. I wish I could have known then that we would still be friends 25 years later.
Well, before we get to that, because that is something we really want to discuss, you were in some ways at the forefront of exposés inside. I mean, you came out your book came out a year before The Devil Wears Prada, although that movie was made a year earlier.
Yes.
What did you think of that?
It's funny because, again, we never intended to start a genre. But we know that Lauren went to publishers and said, I worked at Vogue. This is going to be Nanny for Vogue. And that's the pitch she sold it on. She did. And then just wrote it very, very quickly. But we are big fans of truth to power. So on one hand, I think it was great. And I think this is sort of the birth of what ultimately culminated in the Me Too movement.
Right.
The idea of saying, like, we are not invisible and you can't just treat us like garbage and think that you'll always be able to get away with it. And then on the other hand, yes, some things should be allowed to be private. But I think people should be held accountable for treating other people badly.
Well, The Devil Wears Prada was much more thinly veiled than the Nanny. You had fictitious characters.
Yes. She had one very
we know
specific,
who that is.
Yes, antagonist, yes.
But that brings us, you two wrote, this became an entire industry. You had, 9, 10 books together, and then you had this conscious uncoupling in a good way. Moving on, tell us about that.
We had done 9 books together, and we were turning 40. And we both had small children. And the funny thing about our partnership is that while on one hand, yes, you're doing half the work, you're also always splitting the paycheck. And we just reached a point as school fees were coming and daycare fees where we realized this is not sustainable. And Emma had come from a corporate background. She had been doing organizational development. So she had always been doing the juggle because when we wrote Nanny Diaries, she would start every night at midnight when she got home from work, and she would write till 3 a.m.
Oh, gosh.
Kind of thing you can do in your mid-20s when you're full of energy.
Right.
And I would get her scenes at 6 a.m., and then I would start and fill in my piece and then send it back to her. So we were going on this 24-hour-a-day schedule. And when the success of the book was so overwhelming, she decided to leave her graduate program at Columbia, leave her job, and join me full time. But she was really itching to get back to what I think is she's really, really meant to do. And I wanted to write non-commercial fiction. So we both wanted the best for each other. And in that case, I was like, please go have health insurance. And she said, please go write this crazy, beautiful novel that's nothing that I could ever participate in. So it was perfect.
So you called it conscious uncoupling, which, Gwyneth Paltrow was made fun of for using that with respect to her divorce.
Yes.
And I'm sure that when you used that term, it was an intentional.
Yes.
Tell us how it applied in this circumstance.
Well, I think we had a deep-seated fear, as any duo does, that when we got to the end of our road, it would cost us our friendship, which was the thing we ultimately cared about the most. We were so dependent on each other from the very beginning. Not only did we share a voice, which is highly unusual, but we also shared a brand before the idea of two people sharing a brand also really existed. And we were so afraid that one or the other of us would abandon the other one. Now in the world of Zoom, that seems so silly, right? That you could go anywhere in the world and collaborate with someone. But back then, we were always like, well, we can't live more than 45 minutes away from each other. How would this work? So when it finally came time for it to happen, the fact that there was never even a single moment of acrimony seemed miraculous to us. We're still each other's first
Another
call.
first, because even hearing you describe how you work together, that's actually a very common, setup with co-authors where they're bi-coastal or one lives in Europe, and it's a perfect thing when one's writing at night and the other one's getting up to the material.
Yes.
You were groundbreaking.
It's interesting. I just got a notice last week, and not me special. It was a blast email that the founders of McLaughlin, one of them is leaving the company, and they use the term conscious uncoupling. And it really does seem to fit perhaps more in a business context than when it comes to a marriage.
Absolutely. I think the umbrage people took with Gwyneth using it is that it implied that they had never had any tension in the marriage, which made everyone divorcing feel like, really?
But you did refer to Emma as your, was it, not life
Soulmate,
partner, your
professional
mom's
life.
soulmate?
Mom's
Yes.
soulmate.
And is that sort of like, I want you to explain the term, but is that kind of like our office spouses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we do share a brain on many levels. I actually just got a message from her husband about my commentary on Adrian Brody's Oscar acceptance speech. And he said, word for word, that is exactly what Emma turned to me and said as it was happening in real time. I was like, yep, all these years later, we have the same opinion at the same time about the same thing. So we know that that is a precious thing in this life, and we never wanted to let our professional journeys get in the way of that.
And did you sit down and have a discussion to say this is how we are going to uncouple, or how did that work?
Is this to plan for when we split up?
No, because we'll be the same thing when we text each other. Did you read such and such? Did you see this?
True.
It's always the same.
We started getting offers to do things that excited me and didn't appeal to her. And so naturally, there were these moments of saying, well, what if I said yes to this and you didn't say yes to this? And it really happened organically. We went to a pitch breakfast, where Emma kept asking, but what do you want? Like, I can give you anything. Do you want siblings? Do you want 1800s? Do you want, Milwaukee? Just tell me what you want and I'll give it to you. And the producer couldn't articulate. He said, I'll know it when I see it. And we walked out of that meeting, and I was standing on the sidewalk, and I'm on fire. I'm like, it could be anything. And Emma's like, I am done.
Right.
Done. This is not a good use of my time.
So it's creative brain versus business brain,
Yes.
although common voice.
Yes.
Were there moments of comparison between the two of you? And they say, comparison is the thief of joy. And did you experience that at various times as you went different ways or had different wants and needs?
I think professionally, we were never able to tell who wrote what subsequently. So it wasn't like, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, where it was so clear, like, what each person's talent lane was. But I think in terms of temperament, after Emma and I separated, she took one of those tests to find out what industry she should work in. And she called me laughing, and she said, officially, I should not work in entertainment. I don't mind sitting through a meeting that's going nowhere. I don't mind people lying to my face. It doesn't bother me at all. And it drove Emma crazy. So I think there did start to be a narrative that I was easier to deal with, only because I sort of have a high bullshit tolerance, pardon my French. And those things would grate against Emma. Also, she came from organizational development, as I've said. So at the end of a meeting, she would say, okay, what did we agree to today?
Right.
What are next steps? Whose deliverables are what? And people were horrified, especially in publishing. Like, who is this crazy lady?
I do have a question. So we find that when we collaborate, which we do very well with, we share documents, and things are so much easier now with Google Documents and Apple Notes. But when we have to get stuff done, we agree shoulder to shoulder, sitting down, boom, we get it done in no time. Did you feel that you needed to be physically together, or was it always just working fine being separate and collaborating that way?
Our partnership predated all of that technology. We had a film project to do before the 07 strike, and we actually got together with a computer coder who we said, can you please find some platform where we can collaborate on a document and not be in the same place?
Interesting.
Where that document can exist and we won't damage the document by engaging with it.
So you came up with track changes.
We totally did. It's all us. And he found us a program that only was being used by coders.
Right.
nothing existed for word processing at that time that could create a shared document. So we were always together every day from 11 till 5 or 6, every day in a tiny space, elbow to elbow.
So not making this entire conversation about Gwyneth Paltrow, recently, she's had this shift again, and we were all hearing what's happening with Goop. And she said something that I actually texted to Maura. She said, there's this weird, deep grief that comes with letting go, saying goodbye, and then calling into question your own purpose. Who am I now? And who knows if she was talking about the kids going to college or if this is the end of, one business entity and going back into acting. We don't know. But this really resonated with me because a lot of what we talk about here is pivoting, reinvention. And for women, it does at times track the changes our families go through, our relationships. Does that resonate with you? Did that track in how you moved onto new things?
Absolutely. I think our identity keeps changing, as women, which is why I also think it's so important not to get overly attached to any one identity because it will make it even more painful. I think if you get to the point where your youngest child is 18 and all you've done is parent, that will make it just that much more painful. It's not the wrong choice, but just know that if you have all of your identity apples in that one basket, that's going to be a lot of apples you're going to have to find a way to replace. And so I've always tried to make sure that I'm cultivating a lot of different arenas of my life and what gives me satisfaction simultaneously. Not always easy, but very rewarding.
You also said something that really made me happy about your love of your lawyer. And
love my lawyer.
we don't hear that very often.
Never.
Right?
And, it was some advice he gave about getting paid for your time.
Yes.
And first of all, that's another theme that we have here. Women often do things for free, lots of volunteering.
Yep.
And I loved what you said that, he said, you got to get paid for your time. Tell us about that and how it affected you.
It really changed my life. I love my lawyer so much. We haven't worked directly with him since Emma and I separated, but we actually got an email from him last week, and just seeing his name in my inbox, I got all twittery.
That is odd, I have to tell you.
It is really odd. We tell him that all the time. We're like, you're the best person who ever lived. So we were having lunch with him, and we were in the middle of doing rewrites for a film company, and he leaned over the table and flicked me in the forehead and said, stop working for free. And I stumbled out into Rockefeller Center, and snow was coming down, and I just had gotten so bamboozled, especially for women, that there is this narrative that if you want the opportunity, you need to show them what you can do. And we got completely suckered into that. And it had been months since we'd been paid to do anything. And I suddenly realized that if I looked around at my male counterparts, they were getting paid.
Right.
And once I started saying no, people started paying me.
Right.
But it's scary, especially as women. It's really scary to say no.
Yes, and to also ask to be paid. And as the mother of 3 daughters, I see these things popping up, and I take a moment to parrot what we have learned together and say to them, confront the imposter syndrome, look at the salaries, start at a point that you can grow from, because women, when you start behind the 8 ball, you're always behind the 8 ball.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when it comes to writing, would you say it's also a writing issue because people don't seem to want to pay for writing?
Oh, or any art.
Or there
True.
you go.
Absolutely. And having been in this business as long as I have, I've been able to see the genesis. You were asking earlier before we started recording about my Red Book column. And I had a monthly column, and it paid a real 4-figure salary. And then it was a 3-figure salary. And then it was, well, it's good exposure for you.
Right.
I was like, this is a lot of time, and
Right.
I'm not going to do it for free. So the democratization of content, on one hand, it's amazing because people can just connect with an audience without waiting to have someone anoint them. On the other hand, it's a lot harder for people to make a living. When I'm mentoring young writers, I say, just get a quick social work degree. You can be a therapist 2 days a week, make your art 3 days a week, and get a mortgage.
I think that way all the time with, planning your life. And I only have one son, and he's not employed yet. He's in school aged. But with my daughters, I admit it. I think, how can you have a life and have a family? And I'm planning in my head ahead of time. And it's terrible that you have to think like that. You have to think like that?
And that kind of career thinking does not work if you're going to be a lawyer. here.
Yeah.
So, but you're self-employed. Let's talk a little about work-life balance and how you find time without going too far into the writing process, because Christy is going
All
to
right,
grill
we'll
you
leave
on
that
that.
for me.
But let's talk about how you do it in terms of kids. I know you have a daughter and running your business, and the most challenging part of work-life balance when you're self-employed.
Aaron Sorkin once said that he does the thing that's on the top of the pile with 100% of his focus, and then he moves on to the next thing. And I think I'm just very good at compartmentalizing. So if I am editing a client's story or novel, that's the thing I'm completely focused on until it's done. And then I'll move on to doing whatever I need to do. And then when my daughter gets in the door, she gets 100% of my focus. So it's not easy. It did set me up very well for the pandemic because I'm always used to working from home. So that didn't jar me in terms of my sense of going into untime or things not really mattering. I'm like, no, I've always gotten up in the morning and had a sense that this was all urgent. I think you have to, when you're self-employed, sometimes impose an artificial urgency on things in order to be productive.
But what about being interrupted? You don't get interrupted?
Sometimes UPS comes by and my dog barks. But otherwise, I will turn off my email until I've completed the thing that I need to get done. And I try not to feel like I'm pulled into it. Doesn't always work. This past month, I had 3 nonfiction books by 3 different clients that needed to go into production at the same time. And so I had 3 different sets of editors who all needed things urgently because there was a real production schedule. These things had to be done by these specific times. I was a little stressed. There was some tequila, I'm not going to lie.
So do you carve out time in the calendar, and do you make a schedule for yourself? That's what I do. So I'm wondering if that's what you do.
The night before or Sunday night, I'll map the week out and I'll know when I'm going to do what. And it doesn't always work out perfectly, and sometimes I end up behind, but I like to at least have a gist.
But you have some degree of control.
Yes.
We're going to get into more about the writer's life, but before we do, tell us about your new novel.
Oh, thank you. It's called The Best We Could Hope For. It will actually be available on Amazon Prime Reads for the first read.
Oh, that's great. Congratulations.
We know what you mean.
Thank you. At April 1st. So I'm really on the runway now. Sorry?
No joke on April 1st.
Yeah, no joke on it.
And where can people find you? Do you have a website to find your material?
NicolaKrauseAuthor.com. Please, you can find me there. You can ask me a question about absolutely anything.
Unless your Do Not Disturb is on.
Unless I will get back to you. It just might not be immediately, unless you have a production question. And it's an intergenerational family story that looks at the way that baby boomers parented, and then what Gen X's response was to that, and how Gen X in many ways is the first generation trying to live and parent consciously. It's not always pretty, but there is a goal and an aspiration to try to, I think, do things better than they've really ever been done in human history.
I like that. Oh, interesting.
Now you can go into writing, Christy.
So this is your first solo book. And was this something that was on your mind for years? I mean, as we know, it can take years for this baby to be born. Tell us about that process.
It was an idea I had about 20 years ago. And I would talk to Emma about it periodically. And toward the end of our partnership, she really wanted me to go off and do this. And once I started, which was about 9 years ago, there was a pandemic, but it just took a long time for the narrative to lock into place. First, I thought I was going to be writing a book about the character who is my age, who would be about 50 now. But then her mother showed up and didn't stop talking to me for several years. So the narrative ended up being far more expansive.
The mother showed up?
Her mother's like in my head.
Okay.
And just started talking to me and just
She's an artist. We have to go with this.
Yes. Sorry.
I just wanted it to be clear. I'm not judging.
No, I appreciate that. There is a part of me, it's a tiny bit woo-woo. Some people are like that with their creative process. And I followed that path and just allowed it to unfold, however long that took. But then in the next iteration, I needed to impose structure. It needed to follow the A plot, the B plot. There needed to be something that the characters would never do that is the only thing that they can do to solve their problem. But in a story that goes almost 100 years, where you have a handoff from mother to daughter, it was unwieldy to wrestle, and the math didn't really come together until almost the very end.
And do you write first thing in the morning, at night? When do you take your creative time?
When I was doing the first draft of this, I would write 500 words every day, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the great thing is because it's not such a heavy lift, it's something that it's easy to commit to consistently, and that'll give you a first draft in 7 months without working weekends. So for all the parents listening who are juggling a lot of things, that would take me about 45 minutes to an hour, and then I would move on to doing client work for the rest of the day. When I started having to do revisions, that was where I would need to really block out a whole week or 2 weeks and go into the world of it entirely, because I needed to be able to essentially watch the movie in my mind, figure out what wasn't working, make a change, and then watch it again.
Okay, so I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Because you're the novel writer. And as well as you, I don't understand how writing 500 words a day gives you a novel. Do you have it structured like, today I'm going to write about this scene or that scene or this relationship, like, or you just sit down and say, okay, today this is what's in my mind?
I did each installment of the story. So I just kept following the narrative linearly. However, I was wrong about the narrative. So I thought I was following it linearly, and then I would have to go back and insert, which, sorry, is like so inside baseball, and who cares? But just 500 words a day will give you 2,500 words a week. That will give you 10,000 a month. In 7 months, you have 70,000 words. Maybe that's not your entire book. Your novel might be 80,000 words, but you'll have enough to have a sense of momentum and accomplishment. And really, writing doesn't start until you've completed that first draft, because then you have to start editing and wrestling and making changes, and that's where the work really happens.
Had you structured where you knew the story, you knew the characters?
Pantser or plotter?
Thank you.
Thank you. I was a plotter for many, many years. Emma and I had to plot everything explicitly. We would take 3 months to plot out the story before we would start writing. And that way, neither of us would go rogue. So we could innovate within a scene, but we couldn't suddenly change the narrative entirely. And I wanted to give myself the gift of not knowing what was going to happen next. So there are so many scenes in this book where I was as surprised as I'm now hearing readers are by the twists and turns in the story. I'm like, I didn't know that was going to happen either. Crazy, right?
Wow. So I'm thinking, if you had to go back in time and talk to your 25-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Hang in. It's going to be okay. I think maybe if you go to law school, you don't have a quarter-life crisis. But by 25, Nanny Diaries was underway, and I think I felt like I'd arrived. But those first few years after college, where I was nannying and acting and auditioning and getting groped, it was really hard to believe that everything I'd always worked so hard for was going to amount to anything. And that was terrifying.
Yeah, especially as a woman. And I do have a daughter who has been an actress, and I understand that. So you wrote this great piece called Out of My Shell Over You, which is a reference to Friends, which all of us have seen, and Ross and Rachel being each other's lobster.
According to Phoebe.
According to Phoebe,
Yes.
who is not always painted as an intellect, but maybe she is like the closet intellect. Tell us about your lobster. And in this article, you also referenced that you engaged on a lengthy period of self-improvement. Tell us about what that meant and how you ended up with your lobster.
When we were on the Today Show for the very first time, Katie Couric said to Emma, "You're married?" Emma said yes. And she turned to me and said, "Why aren't you married?"
Oh, dear.
Oh, lovely.
Come on, Katie.
I was like, I don't know. Let America gather round. Why don't you think I'm married? So by the time I was 33, I was a godmother many times over. I'd been a bridesmaid many, many times. And dating was as miserable as they made a TV show about it. So I was on a quest. My mother had been sick for a very long time, and that had been a huge part of my pie had gone to that. But I realized that if I didn't take some time to really look at myself and heal my issues, then I was never going to arrive where I wanted, which was partnered with a child. Like, being a mom since I was very little has been a huge goal of mine. And thank God, she totally lives up to the hype. She's a really good time. But I went on a quest. I signed up for this, essentially a Swiss clinic on 57th Street. And I was working with this healer to fix my immune system. I was seeing a tarot reader. I was seeing a Tibetan energy healer. And at the end of all of that, I felt different. And I had an epiphany, which is my soulmate is my soulmate. He is not my soulmate only if I get bangs or lose bangs or gain 5 pounds or lose 5 pounds or wear a prairie skirt. He's just mine. And my first date with my husband, I was wearing like an old Snoopy t-shirt. I'd forgotten to wash my hair. And we've been together now for 20 years.
That's always a good way to start because it lowers the expectations.
Absolutely.
Totally. Yes. This is the whole package.
So can you have it all and all at the same time?
No, that's a crazy idea. I think you should find the extent of fulfillment that you need to feel good at any given moment in your life. So that means if you're in the throes of parenting small people, that's probably, filling your fulfillment cup to a certain extent. So other things are just going to have to go off the plate. The plate will only hold so many meatballs at a time. And you can keep putting more meatballs on, but some meatballs are going to roll off. And I think especially for women, we keep raising the bar on our expectations of ourselves. So if you feel like the things that you are doing, whether that's working and parenting and trying to stay married, and then there's still an itch that there's something you want to open a ceramic studio or you want to be putting songs up on Spotify, then also do that thing. But if you also feel like at this point, maybe let's not shower for a little while because that is the thing you need to take off your plate, take it off your plate. Maybe this is not a year that you start exercising or trying to run a marathon. Be kind to yourself.
I like
That's
that.
always good. Be kind to yourself.
This has been great.
It's been great talking to you. Why don't you tell people again where they can find you and when your book is coming out?
And tell us the title again. I love it.
Thank you. The best we could hope for. Available on Amazon starting April 1st. And my website is nicolacrauseauthor.com. Please come find me.
Thank you so much, Nicola. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you.
Yes,
This was
it's
so
been
fun.
great. Thank you. Please follow us, listen to us, and rate us on our platforms, Spotify, Apple, and our website, thebalanceddilemma.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter and email us your suggestions. There's no cost, but it means a lot to us.